What's up everyone, you Batapesh Kumar here and I hope all of you are doing good. Today I'm going to be talking to you about something very interesting. Now we all love aviation, right? You love aviation, I love aviation, we all love aviation. That's why you're watching this video and that's why you subscribe to Boeing Boy. If you haven't subscribed to Boeing Boy, please do it now. And considering our love for aviation, today I thought why not tell you guys about how it all started in India. So today's video I'm going to be telling you guys how aviation took off in India back in the ages, which was our first flight, which was our first airline, and who was the first licensed CPL holder in India. All this and a lot more in today's video, and let's get started. So we all know how aviation started, right? On 17th of February 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright, the Wright brothers, they did the first ever flight on a very small aircraft which was made out of wood and cloth, and this was done in Kitty Hawk in the USA. However, aviation in India did not start for the next 8 years. The first flight in India happened on 17th of February 1911. It was not done by an Indian. It was actually a French pilot, a 23-year-old French guy whose name was Henri Piquet. He flew a very small Humber biplane which had a 50 horsepower engine, and this was India's first ever flight. It was done from Allahabad to Naini station, a distance of about 10 kilometers, and it took the aircraft 13 minutes to cover that distance. Now this flight was not a passenger flight, it was actually a mail flight. So he was carrying about 6,500 postcards and a few letters. There was no fanfare when he landed at Naini Junction. There was absolutely no one to receive him there except the postman, and he just handed over the bag to the postman filled up with the mail and he left. No fanfare for the first ever flight in our country. For the next 2 decades, such flights became pretty common. Airplanes were initially mostly used to transport letters and mail from A to B. There was no defined timetable for these flights, and we even had a few international airmail flights. But during this time, a few things happened which laid the foundation for aviation as we know it in India today. The first airports to come up in India during this period were in 1924, when airports were built in Allahabad, Bombay and Calcutta. In 1927, under the British Raj, the Indian government set up India's Civil Aviation Department. The first international passenger flight to India was in 1929. It was introduced by Imperial Airways, which was basically British Airways, but in the olden times. It used to be called Imperial Airways. And they introduced the first flight from London to Karachi. Mind you, Karachi was a part of India at that time. This flight took 4 different aircrafts. So the passengers had to change 4 airplanes and they had to make 20 different stops for refueling. So they would stop 20 times on the way to Karachi to refuel the aircraft. In today's money, the ticket costed somewhere close to about 7 lakh rupees. But even then, it was still pretty fast. Coming from London to Karachi by a ship would take somewhere close to about 3 weeks. So 6 to 7 days was not really a very bad thing. Also in 1929, India's first flying school was started. It was called the Aero Club of India and Burma, and they handed out their first ever license and the whole India's first ever commercial pilot license. Can you guys guess who it was handed over to? I'm sure all of you already know. It was given to Mr. J.R.D Tata. It was issued on 10th of February 1929, and as you can see on your screens, this is how the license looked at that time. If you guys also want to get your CPL license like Mr. J.R.D Tata, you can join the other Aviation Academy. It's my own personal aviation academy where we teach upcoming pilots. So if you want to get your aviation career started, you can call us up. Numbers are on your screen right now, and new batches for CPL ground classes are always starting. Feel free to join us, feel free to call, drop in a WhatsApp. We'll help you clear your doubts and we'll help you get started in aviation. And Mr. J.R.D Tata was the pioneer of aviation in India. In 1932, he convinced his uncle, who was heading Tata companies at that time, to invest in aviation. And as a result, Tata Airlines was born. This was India's first airline. The airline was based in a very small hut which had like thatched roof. So पेड़ के पत्तों से छत बनी हुई थी at a small hut is where the airline started off at Juhu Airport in Mumbai. The first flight happened on 15th of October 1932 and it was piloted by Mr. J.R.D Tata himself. The flight carried 25 kilograms of mail for the Indian Postal Services and the flight was from Karachi to Bombay via Ahmedabad. The aircraft flown was a de Havilland Pusmoth. In 1932, India also got its first domestic flight, which was from Bombay to Trivandrum, again by Tata Airlines, and the cost of the ticket in going from Bombay to Trivandrum was about 250 rupees at that time. In the first 1 year of operation, Tata Airlines flew close to about 250,000 kilometers, which is 2.5 lakh kilometers, and they flew close to about 150 passengers. Now that many passengers we fly in one single flight in today's date. But back then, because the airplanes were small, they took 1 year to fly approximately about 150 people. Sometimes, because the airplanes were so small, the passengers actually had to sit on the mail bags inside the aircrafts to get from A to B. In 1946, Tata Airlines was renamed as Air India as we know it today. And 2 years later in 1948, Air India operated its first international flight, which was from Bombay to London. Now this flight was a weekly service and it had a special name to it. It was called the Malabar Princess. The flight was done on a 40-seater Lockheed L749 Constellation and the flight took 24 hours and 2 refueling stops to get to London, with tickets costing 1,720 rupees back in the day. In 1953, the government of India decided to nationalize Air India, which means it was no longer a private owned airline, it was now a government owned airline. However, in recognition of Mr. J.R.D Tata's work, he was made the chairman of Air India, and under his leadership, Air India became one of the world's best airlines back then. In 1960, Air India had a fleet of 6 Boeing 707s. Those were the only aircraft it owned, and it became the world's first airline to move on to the jet era, which means the aircrafts were no longer powered by pistons. All the aircrafts in Air India's fleet at that time were powered by jet engines and they were Boeing 707s. Mr. J.R.D Tata continued to head Air India till 1977, at which point he was removed from his post because of political problems and because of Indira Gandhi's emergency which he supported. But all of that aside, that is how aviation took off in India. It was all thanks to Mr. J.R.D Tata's initiatives and his love for aviation and airplanes. No wonder he's called the pioneer of aviation in India. I hope you guys got to learn something new today. If you did, please do subscribe to the channel. Please do show your love for aviation and for Boeing Boy. Thank you so much for watching. Drop in a comment on how you think aviation is gonna proceed further in the future. What do you think is gonna happen? Let's hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one.